got their interest by saying, I can show you how to make some really cool rings of power. And so what he did was he taught Celebrimbor and his smiths how to create rings of power. He helped in making each ring of power, and when he did that, he also put a little bit of himself into all of these rings, except for 3 rings that
like a Horcrux.
Kind of, a little bit.
Very much so, yes.
Except for 3 that Celebrimbor made himself completely away from Sauron. And then after that was done, Sauron went back to Mount Doom, forged the One Ring, and then put it on, and immediately everybody who was wearing the Rings of Power were like, oh God, we've been duped. And took off all of their rings, put them into hiding, but Sauron was still able to find all of them except for the 3 that Celebrimbor made, which are the 3 elven rings.
And it took him a while to find the last of the 7.
Yeah.
How many thousands of years back in the timeline are we in the second age?
This has got to be before the...
We're like early to mid-early second age at this point.
Right, so this is way before the downfall of Numenor.
Oh yeah.
And so all this,
yeah.
I mean, you guys keep in mind the scope of many thousands of years of possible stories that are in here.
But now that the veil has been lifted and
We're going to talk about all of them in this
everybody knows that Sauron is behind the rings and he wants the rings back. He begins to make war against the elves, and Celebrimbor tries to fight him, but is ultimately captured, tortured, and killed.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And now let's go to what happens to Numenor.
Well, how does this tie to Numenor? Well, Numenor actually came in after this war and was able to push Sauron and his armies back to Mordor. And I have to look up the name of the king, but I believe it was Tar Minastir.
Right.
Yes, there are lots of repeating names here.
Well, Tar just means king, so you have to...
Yeah. But he's a king rather than a place. So he's able to push Sauron back, and Sauron is now just like super angry at men. And so
I feel him.
Yeah. and so he uses the 9 rings that were hidden among men and begins to use them to corrupt the men into the Nazgul. And meanwhile, Numenor is going through its own political strife because there's a thing in Numenor called the Ban of the Valar, where Numenorians, they have exceptionally long life. They can live to be 200, 300 years old. But there is...
They are as far west as mortal lands go.
But the one thing that they can't do is they can't travel further west than Numenor. They can't go to Valinor. And they begin to resent the Valar, they begin to resent the elves for having immortality, and this causes a schism between those who want to stay, who believe that they are superior, and those who want to stay faithful to the elves and the Valar.
And Sauron uses his fair form as Anakin, right?
Yes.
To stoke the fires of that.
So that's all the backstory.
And they all had hats that said, "Make Numenor great again."
Pretty much. And so, well, I mean, you're more right than you know.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. So,
so it was Tolkien's warning about populism and nationalism gone crazy. Oh,
yeah. Okay. So
this is why these stories continue to resonate and be pertinent to us, and why we continue to keep going back to Lord of the Rings, even as we have newer stories to tell. But I'm personally, I'm going to jump in here with this because I'm having my girl rage over here. I'm really hoping that one of the things that we see from this series is more contemporary storytelling that is within the scope of some of the conversations that we're having about, like, where are all the women in Middle-earth? Where are all the people of color in Middle-earth? When do we get the Legolas and Gimli love story that we've been We deserve to see Legolas and Gimli sailing off on their ship together. So great,
That would be cool.
Yeah. That is a beautiful image. challenge.
You know, we've had so much controversy, like, within discussing, like, as the different films have come out, and they've tried to adapt the story to the sensibilities of a more modern audience. And we've had a lot of conversations within the OneRing.net and at other panels, and like raging at home alone in front of the TV.
Is this where we bring Tar-Rail and the schism that created in the fandom in?
Right, and you
Well,
know, I think it's impossible to think that they're not going to be bringing in a lot of new characters that we haven't seen before. There are a lot of stories
It's
that we...
necessary. I
Yeah.
mean, the stories that are in the appendices are very sketchy, and they involve like three principal characters:
Yeah, they need
Ar-Pharazôn,
filling out.
and
Like,
Elendil,
there's
and
a-
Sauron.
The chronology of people notwithstanding, yeah, they all had family, and they all had neighbors, and they all had, you know, other people.
Yeah, we saw it a little bit. Peter Jackson tried to start showing that a little bit in The Hobbit. If you go in and watch the scenes in Lake Town, when there's like crowd scenes, there are actually people of color in the crowd.
Yeah.
We can presume that, you know, people actually traveled throughout Middle.
Yeah, because there was different looks to some of the costumes. They wanted to make it look like people traveled from different regions and were there because it's a trading place.
Right.
Well, and also, when Aragorn was Thorongil, and it says he went into the Far East and deep in the South.
Where the stars
to
are strange.
exploring the hearts of men, both evil and good. So you could incorporate, I mean, right now, it's the good against the bad, but if you made it more encompassing, like Game of Thrones, where each...
Well, that's the Game of Thrones is a really good example. Game of Thrones, the Civil War in Westeros, is not what it is about. What it is about is all those human character stories in the books, which is, I haven't seen the show very much in the books. You know, every chapter is headed by the main character from whose point of view that chapter takes place.
Well, all the different races.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You see it from all
I
of their
think
points of view.
the Numenor story certainly has huge amounts of scope to have a large number of important characters, not just side characters. It's not just Ar-Pharazôn and Sauron and Elendil and the rest, you know, like Gilligan's
No,
Island.
there's like the character who only gets like a little mention in the appendices, and the Silmarillion, who, if I were writing it, I would make this person a major character in a Numenor series, is the wife of Ar-Pharazôn,
Yeah.
who was actually supposed to be queen, but she got usurped at the last minute, and he, like, not only was she usurped, he then forced her to marry him. Yeah,
And then he
and
left
also they
out.
were cousins, so double U. but then because she is actually somebody who was loyal to the faithful, whereas the final king Ar-Pharazôn was very much not. So in my mind, she is somebody who is constantly working against him.
So that would be a great dynamic right
Yeah.
there.
Because there was the whole kind of underground of...
Yeah, the
and-
underground of the faithful.
And so it would be, that would be really cool.
So what brings about the actual downfall of Numenor? I mean, so now
Well,
we're
okay.
setting up the fact that they
So that, yeah,
got
all this was backstory.
How much of that story is in the Silmarillion that they cannot tell? How much is in this book that they already have licensed?
Well, I've been.
Here's what's in
I've
the
been
appendix,
focusing a
right?
lot on like the summary that's in the appendices.
Yeah, it's a nice summary.
Yeah.
It's actually a lot.
And,
That's quite a
but
lot.
and yeah, the appendices actually does mention a lot of these characters by name, which means they're fair game.
That's good.
Okay, cool. So what do they do that,
So, like my ideal Numenor series actually focuses on the last two dynasties. The first one is the king Tar-Palantir, who was a seer.
Farsi.
And he's the one who creates the prophecy that as long as the White Tree of Numenor stands, the line of kings will stand as well, which also transfers to the White Tree of Gondor. And there's a cool scene that you can do with the Isildur who when they're basically, they know that there is a cataclysm coming, so they are creating these 9 ships that are going to sail away from Numenor. And Isildur goes on this pretty much a heist mission to get a seed from the White Tree of Numenor to take with them to replant in Middle Earth.
Oh, I'm so digging that as a
Yeah.
nice mission.
Yeah,
I'm digging that.
And so what you have is Tar-Palantir, who is the good king, but he's constantly fighting against the people who want to turn against the Valar and want to turn against the elves, and he's trying to create peace, and it's not happening, and he finally just withers and dies. And then his daughter is supposed to take the mantle from him, because Numenor has a wonderful law that the firstborn takes the mantle of ruler despite whether or not they are a man or a woman.
Yay.
You know,
We like this. We like the Numenoreans, except for
Amazing
them.
from a
And
monarchist.
also it'd be really interesting to see when the Numenorians first came to the shores of Middle-earth and...
Oh, well, they were
That's
already
kind, of
there.
that's kind of a long story in the past. It's cool, but like I don't.
That was empire building, and in a way
Yeah,
it was kind of considered to be part of their
I sort of feel
downfall.
like a Numenor series should focus on like the final aspects of it.
And it has a great climax.
Because it has like a completely insane